In today's video, we're going to be having a look at data stores and how they can be used in your automation projects to help you achieve any of your automation goals. So first of all, what is a data store? Well, for that we have on screen some handy descriptions to give us a bit of an indication as to what they can do. So our third item along here, next to activities and workflows and schedules, we have data stores. Now before we add one, we can look underneath and see that a data store is described as a container for persistently storing collections of data, with some examples of the data types following thereafter. If we want some further information about data stores, we can click on this little eye icon for some documentation information next to this item. And if you want to view any further documentation, you can also click on this icon down the bottom right to open up our GitHub, which is storing all of our documentation for the entire platform. So you can read that in your own time, but let's jump into some real-world examples as to how data stores can be quite helpful. We can add a data store at the top, enter in a name and a description, and here we are. We are inside of a data store, and the main thing at the moment is that we've created it and we haven't got anything inside of it. So what can we see at the moment? We can add items either using this nice big button in the middle or this button on the left-hand side. Each do the same thing, but once you start adding items, you'll just add from the left. And the other thing to note at the top is you can refresh in case your data has updated. Perhaps you've got some automation running, or you've populated it from an application. Say a client has run through and entered in some information into a form, and it may be updates here. Then you can refresh your data store so it's got up-to-date data. You can come over to the next one, which is our entity viewer. So if you could have entities inside of your data store that relate to one another, you can open up the entity viewer and view that there. You can share this data store with other users or particular groups, and you can type their name in here. Our documentation is linked on the right hand side of this module. Or you can search for certain items inside of your data store. So let's add on a couple items and look at the different types of items we can store. Clicking on the button, we can add variables, which are as they sound. They're like any other variable in Docker. They can match any of the other types that are supported in Docker, and you can give them any values as such. Perfect. And then once you enter one, you can get a little idea as to what this variable is alongside a preview on the right hand side. Let's move on. We can add a password. And here we have a password, which you can see if I click on it, I don't get a preview and it's been encrypted. So you can use this in your automation and we'll look at that shortly. However, you can't preview it, but you can update the variable by opening it up in the edit window and editing some values there. We can add a file, so you could actually upload any file on your computer and have it be sat in the data store for use in your automation. You can also add an identity, and what an identity allows you to do, and we've got specific videos to go into this in more depth, but I'll give you a high level overview, is allows you to use a provider such as Microsoft or Google and set up an identity with them so that you can use that identity in your automation. So let's say you set it up with Microsoft. This would allow you to create an identity which would effectively act as logging in as that user. So you could say provide this with your username and password alongside the access you'd like it to have, which is what scopes are. And then when you use this identity in your automation as effectively like a little auth token, it will then give that automation permission to run through the automation with the scoped permissions that you've set here. But if that didn't make sense, then we have more specific videos going into this topic. And finally, we have tables. And you can see I can add a table and it gives me the opportunity to add a name. And we can also see that immediately it takes us to our columns, allowing us to add any further columns we like. So it's going to pre-populate with an ID column, which is a mandatory column for Docker. We have a created and updated date time column, which each will give you updated date times based on their relevant labels. So when it was created is going to be static and will not change. However, updated will automatically update the date time based on when the modification was last made to that row in the table. But let's add some others. So we can add a string for name. We're going to add age. I'm going to set that to a number. And let's also add some documents and say we want to add a file type. Fantastic. So now we've got some information in our data store. What can we do with it? Well, let's go over and look at an activity. Let's use an activity to interact with our data store. So let's add a row to that table we just made. We can click on the data chip button, go to data stores at the top, and from here we can interact with the data store that we made previously. And just like that, we now have access to our table data inside of our activity. And updating anything here, so we're doing add row to table, will automatically add it straight to the data store. So it won't make a local copy, it will just directly write to the data store, which is quite powerful. So we could say John, we could say that he is 45, and I don't have any documents I want to add for John. Click on run, we can see that it says it's added a row to the table, who's John, and he's 45. And hopping over to our client data, opening up the table, we can see a preview on the right hand side, shows that we now have John, age 45, was added to our table. Perfect. Additionally, we talked about sharing before. You can also share the individual items, the actual table itself, or you can go a step further and within the table, you can then share rows within a table to be viewable by only specific users or user groups.